trust Tua Tagovailoa in the fantasy football playoffs in Week 15? That more this week on the couch. Derek Brown, the people want answers. Tua, are we feeling a little gun shy with him now?
I still think you start him and trust him, Sig. I mean, like, considering what the guy has done for the entirety of the season, I mean, yes, it's concerning to see the Chargers drop back and look like they just had the Dolphins' number, but if we're assuming that Tyreek Hill plays, I think that's kind of the linchpin. I mean, am I wrong here, Sig? Like, you take Tyreek Hill away, maybe the ceiling is kind of iffy for Tua. Just Jalen Waddle, Gesicki then.
Right. It's just hard. The other thing that is messing with us here is just like in the NFL, late in our season in decisive games in the fantasy football world, the weather can play a role, right? Weather can play a role. And the game's going to be in Buffalo this week.
That's right.
It's on Saturday. It's even better. Like, you have to make your decision early. Now, as of today, Derek, we got Chris Allen, lots of other good people in the fantasy space doing great fantasy football weather intersection. We've come so far. 40-50% chance of snow all day and winds. I don't remember if that's the night game or not. The winds look the worst in the afternoon. But regardless, we've seen games where the elements can be overcome, and we say, why did we flinch? Why did we doubt ourselves? Where I'm at right now, Derek, is if we just look at how Tagovailoa played, and we think about how we considered the Chargers defense coming into that game, and we think about how we consider the Bills defense, and we look at how games in Buffalo have gone lately, not exactly shootouts or track meets. I mean, I feel like you're right. Tyreek Hill is going to be fine. I feel like Tua might be a disappointment. And then there's a bigger picture thing of like, was this just a shooting star, this Miami pass offense, and the league's catching up? We'll see. We're getting to that crunch time. And that's the other thing, is we're getting to where things get tighter. It's not quite playoff football, but it changes. The margins of error change. Everything changes. And here we are. And it's great in a way, Derek, because we don't have to keep thinking about what's on the horizon. We're here. We're here now in the fantasy playoffs, right? No bye weeks. And I feel like we can kind of drill down and just look at week 15. We can just talk about different games. We can talk about players, those pivot point players where we know people are going to feel ambivalent, like Zonovan Knight against the Lions, who all of a sudden have a shutdown run defense. And again, we've been through so many ups and downs already this year with different players, different teams, different units. Yeah. But now the window is small, so we know what we have to work with. We know we have to work with Knight, but we know what we have to work with. I love the Lions, by the way. I feel like contractually obligated to say they're going to run the table and go to the playoffs. I want it to happen. I want it to happen so bad.
I had so many futures tickets on the Lions winning the North and then making the playoffs. Like, they're one of the teams that honestly, Sig, that like I've kind of become like unofficial fans for. It's been the Lions, you could say the Dolphins, the Eagles, and the Bears. All of those franchises, I love what they're doing right now currently.
Yeah, well, I think with the Lions, it's just so easy to be a fan of Dan Campbell. It's so easy to want to live in a world where his style, everything that he brings to the table, all the different layers, not just with football, but with just leadership and understanding the role he's in. As these football teams are families, and he's a leader of that family, a patriarch. The Dolphins and Mike McDaniel, and I just like Mike McDaniel because he doesn't look at all like any other head coach. And I don't just mean look like. I just mean everything about him,
or speak like he talks a totally different language. I love listening to his pressers.
Yeah, and that's why, again, it'll be interesting to see how Miami holds up, because there's a certain as you get to this point in the season, Derek, it's like fortitude, constitution, that kind of stuff. Mike McDaniel doesn't necessarily transmit that, but you will see the Eagles. We can lavish all kinds of praise on them where they're at. I brought up today that in week 17 they're gonna have a choice even if they clinch the number 1 seed. Derek, do you play the Saints straight up? It's because you're gonna improve your top 5 draft pick.
That's a good spot to be. Seriously though, I mean, it's a question. It's a question.
Yeah. I like that you bumped your. I think was it May that you said don't be surprised if Jalen Hurts has that Lamar Jackson 2019 kind of season. It's great.
I mean,
It's
it
great.
doesn't sound crazy now, but back then, I can't tell you how many people I got in the replies for that, Sig, that were just like, okay, whatever. You're
Yeah,
just
you're
doing this for hot
he's,
takes. And I'm
yeah,
like,
of
no,
course.
really, really not. Like, this team is
Well,
really good.
what's great about it too with Jalen Hurts, I was talking about this recently, that you really have seen him grow. And we
Hmm.
we talk about a lot about player development and things like that, but it is something to see a player and remember very recently you watch that player and some things that are present weren't present, right? And for me, watching Hurts, I think it's just timing, rhythm, his processor being in tune with everything around him. And all of a sudden now he looks like a passer that has all this nuance and
Hmm.
touch and natural accuracy that you didn't see, but it wasn't because he's not an accurate passer. It's because he wasn't quite in tune with the action around him. And now that's a fun offense, fun team to watch. And then you mentioned the Bears, and we'll see. They are playing each other this weekend, actually.
Yep.
That makes
It's
me
going to be
think
a
of
fun
Buddy
game.
Ryan, Bears, Eagles. But let's get back to the matter at hand, fantasy football. You were at the Fantasy Pros doing the primer. That's one of the Herculean labors of fantasy football. Like you're here, the stables. I don't even remember. I lost my mythology specifics. You're cleaning the stables every week. There's a Colts Ryan joke in there somewhere. But anyway, let's talk about the Jets and Zonovan Knight and this matchup with the Lions, because Knight's going to be right at that. He's a lead back in a reasonably productive offense, but at the same time, the Lions have been a shutdown defense lately.
I mean, you're really playing him as it's a volume play, right, Sig? Like RB2 ish, considering we're gonna pencil him in for 12 to 15 early down carries, a little bit of passing down work. I think the big question for the Jets is how much are they going to be in the red zone and who's going to be under the quarterback? Like who's going to be under
Right.
center? Are we going to see the Mike White show? Is it going to be Joe Flacco? I'm hoping one of those two because I mean, do you think that there's any way that the Jets start Zach Wilson? I don't, as long as they're in the playoff hunt.
Yeah, here's the problem. All right. Here's the problem. Obviously, this Zach Wilson situation has not just been the outcome of one person's thought
Mm-hmm.
process, right? There's a
Yep.
tug of war happening here. There's a power struggle happening here in the organization. So that therefore you can't assume assumption of rational coaching, assumption of rational personnel
That's fair.
management. You can't assume it
Mm-hmm.
because even how Zach Wilson got, Greg Rosenthal said, feels like a benching. Remember that when he had that knee injury, and then he went
Mm-hmm.
from maybe playing in week 1 to not playing until week 4 or 5. Uh, so something else is going on here. And is it a lip service thing where Robert Saleh says we plan on Zach Wilson playing? What? You plan on him playing again this year?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. If Mike White keeps playing and they keep winning, then there should be no reason. And there's all kinds of things about you have in between the locker room. The head coach is managing the locker room, but also looking up at management and having to appease or otherwise manage management. It's a relationship. So I don't know if we'll see Zach Wilson. I don't know if we'll see Joe Flacco. He got in and had a cameo and fumbled. So
Mm-hmm.
you know, who knows? And it's a really interesting crossroads for the Jets. But I think what all this highlights, Derek, is the chance for offensive collapse in this game for them.
True.
That this
True.
could be just a nightmarish, futile kind of game for them if it's Zach Wilson, if Mike White is out there and he's hurt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Flacco, well, he's been there, done that. Remember, he lit the fuse with that ridiculous comeback against the Browns. With the magical thinking of this team. Detroit's fun. I guess on the flip side of that, let's just do an either or. Let's say you had to choose between DeAndre Swift and Zonovan Knight.
Ooh. I'm gonna go Zonovan Knight. I can't trust Swift these days, Sig. Like and it's not a talent thing. Like this is twofold, and I guess we're gonna open up a larger can of worms here. One of my pet peeves this season is that you can't trust a lot of these injury reports that are coming out. Like, yes, we've had this over multiple seasons, and it's like we hear all of the stories after seasons are done, and it's like, well, this player was practicing in full for the entire season. It's kind of like not just the Michael Thomas situation, but situations like that where after the season we find out said player was playing on one leg. He was gutting it through 5 different injuries. And I feel like, and maybe I'm just prisoner of the moment a little bit of this, but I feel like we're getting more and more of that inaccuracy, the coach speak, the games that teams play with the injury reports, even more this season. Like we just had last week where T. Higgins got hurt in pregame. We didn't hear a word about it,
Mhm.
and he doesn't even play. So that happens. DeAndre Swift, all of the stuff with Detroit playing, he's a full practice participant. And I wrote this up in the primer last week. I was like, he's back on the injury report. He was limited to open the week. Like, to me, that spoke more volumes of anything. And I was like, I'm worried about his snap count. And then we saw the Detroit Lions followed suit. Like, they went right back to the same usage he had for the numbers of weeks when he wasn't fully healthy. It was like he got the one ramp up game and then he came out of it dinged up, and then we're like, okay, fine, we're just going to put you back on the cupboard. We're going to sit here and use Justin Jackson, some of these other guys. Like, you can't handle the volume. So I can't trust Swift moving forward. And honestly, I don't want to say we take all these injury reports with a grain of salt, Sig, but like,
Mm.
it's rough these days. Like, we can't
Yeah.
just say, okay, they practiced in full and da 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 da. Like, teams are just pulling all kinds of jokes out there.
Sure. Oh, there's so many things we could unpack here, Derek.
Mm-hmm.
And we're on the couch, so everybody knows we take license to go wherever we're going to go. And the kind of people that like to listen to this show, I think, know that it's just going to be, like I said before we went on, it's just sort of a jam session where there's topics here. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind when you say all that, Derek, is again, we're charlatans. We pretend we can predict the future, and we're peeking through keyholes. And even when we get things right, it's probably for reasons we had no idea, and we just got lucky. You know what I mean? The wheel just stopped with the wrong clock twice a day, right? But you're right about the question of injuries and the question of what's actually going on versus what filters up to the level that we're aware of it. And then there's some fuzzy space in between where we know players' reputations, or we know how teams handle things, or we're parsing. Gene Brammel's the best, like, all bow down Gene Brammel to understanding how to parse exactly and how to get the information, because they're not the NFL. We've talked about this for a long time. The NFL strategically communicates, right? Everything you know, you're supposed to know. Even the things you're not supposed to know because sources say, you're supposed to know, right? Like and it's managed, it's massaged, and like you said, there's even this gamesmanship. As an aside, I think teams that do gamesmanship with the injury report, it's just like gamesmanship with the draft. Just concentrate on winning the game. Concentrate on getting the right draft pick.
Yep.
Who cares? It's a waste of time. But you're right about the inaccuracy of reports. We have no idea the nature of the injury sometimes, the true severity of it. And we also get these downgrades during the week, gets hurt during practice. We have no idea.
Yep.
But with DeAndre Swift, let's get back to DeAndre Swift, right? There were lots of murmurs last year, and it was vague with stuff like the difference between playing hurt and playing injured, and stuff like that, right?
The do Staley quotes, every single time.
Just stuff that made you pause and say, there's some disconnect. And even though Swift was going in the second or third round, I think that wasn't even a speed bump, right? It's a descendant running back. I don't think that I was beating the drum a lot about this offense because of the way they finished the season.
Yeah,
I didn't even expect them. I didn't even expect them to be nearly this good. I mean, this is far surpassed anyone's expectations. Same. But you would think if you knew the Lions offense was going to improve this much, and that Swift in the second would be a hit. And I even remember saying, like, I'm not against taking Swift in the second just as a chip to put on the offense. In the second week, Derek, it looked like that was how the story was going to unfold. He was going to be a league winner.
We all looked like we were going to be just basking in his praises the entire season.
Right. And then with 50, 60% snaps, with the same 50, 60% snaps that he got a couple weeks ago. So, he was showing that 50% snaps is fine for him because of his explosiveness, because of the efficiency of this offense. Then he finally gets off the injury report. This offense finally gets all hands on deck, and he looks pretty much the same a couple of weeks ago. And then you see it tail off. And then you get back to something this year. Lester Freeman, my man in the chat room, saying this has been the least trustworthy year. I agree with that.
It's been bad
for lots of reasons, but one of them has been this fickle backfield management, where you like to think that merit in performance will then dictate the workload going forward. Like, let's say James Cook. I don't know. I'm just picking a name out of the air. You know what I mean?
That's a good name. That's a good name to pull out of the air.
Yeah. So what it does is, Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson, right? It undermines your trust, so that as a fantasy proposition, even though there's a high end range of outcomes for some of these players, it undermines your sense of security And like you said about Zonovan Knight going all the way back to Knight versus Swift, it's just knowing what Swift is going to get 7, 8, 9 touches, maybe. You don't know.
Maybe.
We had, I think he had like 13, 15 carries a couple weeks ago. What happened? But Knight, you're going to get those 15, 18 touches. But we also, even though the Jets defense has been good, the Lions offense is surging now. So I think that, there's a chip to put there on Swift because he's in the better offense right now, but then Justin Jackson enters stage left, gets the touchdown last week, and ruins everything. So yeah, I think you're right. And I think the nature of what you do with the primer, every time I say about the primer, I just want to say like, Mike, what's up, Mike Tagliere? Rest in peace,
Same.
man.
Same.
He's with us. While we're doing if we're doing fantasy football stuff and we love it, he's with us. You get used to how we have to present this facade of certitude. I mean, it's the nature of the product. But the closer you look, isn't this like a metaphor for life, right? I mean, the closer you look, the closer you get to it, the more you realize how many uncertainties there are underlying all of this. But that's why they talk to us and ask us. That's why we talk to each other. Let's talk about the New England backfield. That just went down less than 24 hours ago. How interested are you, assuming Ramondre Stevenson is going to be out, how interested are you in Pierre Strong, in Kevin Harris as a potential savior? How strong to the hole are you going to go for them in your waiver wire pickups?
I have been a Pierre Strong truther since like draft time, Sig. I mean, before the landing spot for Pierre Strong, I was hoping and praying he went somewhere good and then he could drop to New England, and I'm like, oh, come on. Like my man crush Mondre is there. He's still got Damian Harris. I was like, maybe it looks a little bit better next year after Harris is gone. So I'm going to go back to the man crush. I love Pierre Strong, and he showed why we should love him this last week. Like, Kevin Harris wasn't bad, but Kevin Harris is much in the Damian Harris-esque mold. He's an early down grinder. He's going to sit there and pick up the yards that he's supposed to pick up. He's a gap runner. He gets downhill fast. Pierre Strong is a home run threat. Every time he touches the ball, he's probably going to have the passing down work in this offense, which we've seen. Andre's been operating as I want to say the wide receiver 2 in this offense, but honestly, you look at his target share over the last few weeks, Sig, and he's the wide receiver 1 in this offense. So if Pierre Strong picks up like half of that and the early down work, I love Pierre Strong. Like, he'd be my top guy right now. And this is not a shade against Kevin Harris, but I think you're looking at talent, you're looking at big play opportunity, and he's going to sit here and play in the passing game. It's an easy Pierre Strong for me.
Yeah, and a matchup against Vegas this week. Yes. And then we'll see.
Struggle against receiving backs.
Yeah, Cincinnati, Miami, next 2 weeks after that. But it's a week-to-week thing. I like that. I like the idea of giving a clear tilt, put your thumb on the scale for Strong over Harris. You're absolutely right about the speed. And, of course, he intersects with that strange story. Remember when the Patriots were going to start doing more zone running and incorporate all the Shanahan stuff? I think that Strong was part of that. I think the pick may have well been because of having that in the incubator, and he has that speed. And you think of him as that classic one-cut back with that speed getting into play. We'll see. New England scuffling, trying to get to the playoffs. They're just going to get disposed of. Yeah, well, that's what's fun. I mean, again, as it is in the NFL, so it is in fantasy football. It's fun because much at the same time that the stakes are going up in the NFL, the stakes are going up in all of our fantasy matchups. And that's one of the things. I mean, I think I still marvel 16 years into this, 17, I don't even know.
Well, you were asking me pre-show, and I was like, I don't even know how many years I've been doing this.
Yeah, well, because it's always today, right? I don't want to say, it's so funny. It's like prison, right? It's not really like prison, but what do they say? What's that saying? Like, there's 2 days, the day you go in and the day you go out, right? There's the first week of the season and the last week of the season. We're not really in prison, but at the same time, we definitely are signing up to be completely in tune with this thing all the way through. But
I mean... Look, at the end of the week, Sig, this office behind me, like this entire shelf, gets very prison-esque. Like, I've got like plates, energy drinks, all kinds of stuff. The Friday clean out of my office after being locked in here for the content grind, it's not pretty, man. It looks like
Sure.
basically somebody forgot to clean out their garage at the end of the week.
Yeah, right. If we're if we're really gonna go like self-help with this, Derek, and really
I need
just
it,
make it
Sig.
valuable.
It's
Just
week
make it valuable.
15. I need it.
I know, right? Right. It's like for the value for us, and not so much for the people listening. It's just how like we don't take good care of ourselves.
No, it's true.
See, but this is where I'm on the couch when I say, is deep down, is it just an excuse to not take care of yourself, and you still could do a better job taking? I'm trying to get
No,
up
it's
earlier
true.
and working
It's
out, eating
true.
more vegetables and fruits. I'm 47. I have to do these things. But let's get back to the matter at hand, because I really can get lost in this. And
Same. I could talk 30 minutes about absolutely nothing that anybody wants to hear about, especially
well,
with you, man. Like, I mean,
yeah,
we could get off on a tangent and just go way in left field.
just forget that people are listening to us right now, which probably would be the best show, right? I mean, that's maybe someone could do a podcast where there's some sort of hypnosis or something where you don't know you're on a podcast and people have a real conversation, and then that's going to be the most popular thing because that's what we're all craving for. It's real human interaction. But about fantasy football, Pierre Strong, I think, also stands for that because you told a good story about how you were excited about Pierre Strong until he landed with the Patriots, and you're like, oh, but it's another reminder that all these guys are going to get a chance to under the lights at some point to show what they can do. And if they got the goods, they got the goods. So if you see it, when you watch, you see that glimmer, and you're like, oh, he's got it. Integrated technique, Matt Waldman calls it, the it factor. Then you just file that away because what were the chances that Pierre Strong was going to get some sort of meaningful opportunity this year? If you would, different points in the season, you would have said very, very low, and yet here we are. Is there anybody else like that comes to mind that? Because listen to who we're talking about: Zonovan Knight, Pierre Strong. There's this theme here of when we get to this point in the season, we might rely on players, or at least you might be. Because what did we talk about at the beginning of the season, Derek? Be open to things, right? The people who are the first to adopt, like, oh, okay, we all thought this was going to happen, but actually this is happening. Similarly, there are players, especially I think with running backs late in the season. We all have the stories of the running backs that helped us win a championship that weren't even on a roster a month before they helped us. It's the fresh legs against wore down defenses. I think it's the cold weather shift to the running game. So is there anybody else out there lurking, or somebody that you want to just put your stamp of approval on, even though it might feel weird to trust them right now? I mean, I can toss out some names too, I mean, are we feeling Samaje Perine despite Joe Mixon being back after he scored, going up against Tampa Bay this week, a team that would force Cincinnati to be in pass mode more often? Are we going right back to the well with J.K. Dobbins?
Oh, one that just jumps out at me, Sig?
Huh.
And it's scary as all get out. Who are you putting your chips on out of the Houston Texans backfield?
Right.
With Dameon Pierce out, Eno's cut, it's going to be Rex or Dare. Like, the Chiefs give up rushing production, and they give up receptions. Like, one of these guys falls into the freaking end zone. They're maybe an RB2.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be in leagues. I generally like to be in leagues deep enough where the answer to that question matters. I hope that people in fantasy football playoffs and with 32 teams playing this weekend probably won't have to rely on the Houston back. I am fascinated at Chris Moore, depending on what's going with Cooks. What's the funniest one I saw was, oh yeah, Jeff Driscoll has tight end eligibility.
I saw that on Yahoo. We were talking about that yesterday in Slack. I was like, oh God, we're depraved if we're going down the Jeff Driscoll well. Oh.
Yeah. Well, okay. So on that note, because we're going to talk Louisiana, folks. If you're at all averse to Louisiana centric topic, and I've only lived in Louisiana since late 2018. If you're all averse to that, just when we go off the rails. But listen, on that note, Taysom Hill for like the a lot of teams in the fantasy football playoffs don't have a tight end they can count on. Taysom Hill, Atlanta usually is cha-ching. How do you feel, or are we just too biased down here in Louisiana?
I mean, look, if you're tight end's gross, it's ugly, Sig. Like, unless you have somebody that like you could at least craft the narrative that they're somewhere sniffing around the top 12, like then yeah, go the Taysom Hill route. Like, what else? I mean, if you're balancing between, do I start Taysom Hill or the Daniel Bellingers of the world?
Yeah,
Or
right.
do I,
Well, what about
this is assuming.
what about like a Taysom Hill or like Chiggy Okonkwo or Austin Hooper against the Chargers?
I still kind of feel like I would go the Taysom Hill route. Like,
Yeah.
I, I, and this is, I got it. We're talking about going down the well here. Like, some people hit me up yet last week about like, well, you didn't write up Chig into the primer, and I was like, because you should, like, he was a risky. Yeah, he scored, but if
Mhm.
you look at his usage, it's more of a high wire act. Like, he's running so hot right now. Like, he's splitting snaps immediately down the middle with Austin Hooper. That, like, Austin Hooper, the same type of target share as him. He just got into the end zone. If he didn't get into the end zone, everybody'd be like, "Oh, I played a Conquo last week," but that's not the case because he luck boxed a touchdown. So, guy's talented, but considering those things, yeah, I mean, shoot, give me the Taysom Hill dice roll.
Yeah. Well, and it's probably for me, it's whether Traylon Burks is back. I think if Traylon Burks is
Agreed,
back,
and I think he's gonna be back this week too.
yeah, and it's the Chargers run defense, which I don't. What happened with Miami's running game? But Chargers run defense and Derrick
I don't know.
Henry, you would think. Although, man, it looked like Derrick Henry was going to get 30 carries against Jacksonville, and then that game
But
fell
he had
apart.
like 90 yards in the first quarter, and they were
Yeah,
just like, "Nah, we're good.
well,
We're good."
it was strange the way that happened, but Jacksonville has a ball control passing offense.
Yep.
I mean
Mhm.
they can win time of possession with all that short passing that they do, and then Tennessee got a little more sense of urgency. We'll see about Okonkwo and Hooper. I think that I'm not even sure if because you're right. And Derek, you said top 12. I think it's more like top 5 or 6. I mean, there's only 5 or 6 tight ends we care about, right? Kelsey, Andrews, Hawkinson.
People are scared about
Kittle.
Andrews too. Like, if Anthony
Yeah,
Brown is under
if
center,
Anthony Brown starts,
I've got
sure.
questions about, do I start Andrews? And I'm like, yes, you start Andrews. They're like, well, what about
Yeah.
this? And I'm like, well, I mean, really, like,
You got to start him. You got to start him.
rough.
I mean, look, it's so funny. One of the things that occurs to me, and this is on the couch stuff, one of the things that occurs to me, Derek, is that, again, we were talking about Tua, right? No matter how it turns out, probably this is a sign that the way we interface with fantasy football is just not healthy. No matter how it turns out, no matter how it turns out, Derek, we're gonna think about why we should have known better, right?
True.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if Mark Andrews, if Anthony Brown completes 7 passes and 15 attempts against Cleveland on Saturday, and Gus Edwards has 17 carries, and J.K. Dobbins has 7, and give Kenyon Drake 7 carries, and Anthony Brown can run the ball. Anthony Brown had like 150 plus rush attempts for Oregon. So if they just run the ball like 45 times or 50 times in the game, and they can beat Cleveland because their defense is good, should any of us be surprised? And Mark Andrews has 2 for 17 again. And but at the same time, if they just put together a rudimentary passing game, and maybe he completes 11 passes, and 8 of those are to Andrews, that's not surprising at all either.
Nope.
So no matter what, you can tell yourself, you can see the way that these things can work out good or bad for Andrews. But you're right, it's getting a little too aggressive to start Taysom Hill over Mark Andrews or George Kittle for that matter, especially now that poor Debo.
Yeah, agreed.
Debo Samuel being out just sucks.
I was fixing to say, I was like, maybe the Debo being out, like, kind of pushes the target share to Kittle. So maybe I'm like, I feel better.
And it's
about
George
him versus
Kittle.
Andrews, but
It's George Kittle. I mean, Derek, I always bring up the what can you live with test, right? I can live with losing because I played George Kittle over Taysom Hill. I cannot live with losing. I cannot live with losing my fantasy playoff matchup watching George Kittle like run 3 guys over on the way to the end zone and think, I know he can do that in any given week, no matter who's throwing the ball to him, no matter who the opponent is. And I put that on the bench. Taysom Hill against Atlanta, but again, like it's almost a clear sanity line. There's not many though. I mean, really, Kittle, Andrews, Hawkinson, Schultz. I mean, Schultz has been dependable enough.
Schultz has been good.
We're to 5 basically, I think. So
that's about it. Because I was even looking at like
Njoku.
Yeah, I was going to say Njoku's probably my line of demarcation because after that it's like Freiermuth, but you got the Trubisky and then you got Dulcich, but who's that quarterback? And then even last week they kind of went away from he had the 3 tutty game from Jerry Jeudy. So yeah, I think my line of demarcation is probably Njoku.
Yeah, so 5 or 6. And then Taysom Hill at the head of that pack. Sure, why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
That's really it.
And then if someone is saying, get cute with it and say Jeff Driscoll, I'm not going to say you're crazy
No.
because, I mean, in some ways, Derek, for people in our line of business, it's like risk free because there's almost no bad call tight end because we all understand we're just truly rolling the dice every week. But please
Yep.
don't let this be something that is a call to abolish the position or something like that because, the tougher it is, the more strategy it is, the better.
Mhm.
Okay, let's get back to the primer. I like saying the primer because it makes me think of our friend Mike.
Agreed.
What's something that as you did the primer last week, or if you're, I'm sure even though it's Tuesday afternoon, it's all percolating. Because when I think of the primer, I just think how comprehensive. It's truly comprehensive. The process. What's something that has emerged for you doing that truly comprehensive process that might have missed your attention if you weren't going through everything with a fine tooth comb that you think needs to be shared that could help people?
I mean, I think it's just looking and being so matchup driven, Sig.
Okay.
I go so deep down the rabbit hole with matchups, in a lot of ways, especially like tight ends, cornerbacks, all these different
Mm-hmm.
things. And sometimes I uncover things where I walk into the week and I say, okay, I really like this guy, and then I go back and I look at a few different things and I'm like, oh, I really don't. So like it changes. I think one of the things that I love, and this is my third year before even taking on the primer, doing like game by game, and I've loved it because it gives me a great sense of like going back to ranks and everything, like the overall sense or feeling of the slate, um, and kind of where I sit on it from all different facets. So like for me, it's coming back to the matchups, and then one of the things that I felt like was kind of paramount, even though I'm touching on it, I'm not going down into the depths of like pace and passing rates and
Mm-hmm.
offensive stuff as much as like Pat Thorman and a few other guys that like literally just like they dive into like 12 feet deep.
Yeah,
But
they're
like
fluent in the language. It's like a language they can
mhm.
speak. Yeah.
But I like to throw it out there, and I think it's important for especially in the fantasy space that we all talk about volume and volume and volume and volume is king and all these things about volume, and it's like that a lot of that comes back to just at its macro view, play volume. Like you can't have target volume, you can't have passing volume, rushing volume if your play volume is constricted because this team or both teams run extremely slow. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I tried to like interject in the primer this year that I think is incredibly important is just looking at pace of play. Because if we talk about volume being king in fantasy, then that really comes back to at its core play volume. And so that matters with how fast teams are running. And I think that a lot of the way that teams function, both when they're in close games, when they're down in games, what they do from not just a play calling standpoint, but Philly is a perfect example of this. Like, you look at their first and second half of game splits. In the first part of games, like they run incredibly fast, and then they just get up. They start trouncing people. They take the air out of the ball. They run in the second half. They slow down a good bit. It's a tale of two halves. So it's like when you see the Eagles get pushed a lot, then you get these nuclear games out of Hurts and the receivers and stuff. But when teams don't, it's like, well, you don't press the panic button for Miles Sanders in the first half because they got up with passing, and then in the second half he goes from 5 rush attempts all the way to like 18
Mm-hmm.
because they just run the clock out. So I guess all this comes back to volume, man. Like if we think
Mm-hmm.
that volume is king, I think that one of the parts or pieces that I've tried to highlight and I think is even really overlooked is just pace of play.
Yeah. Well, um, huh. You can look at you can look at offenses and you can get a
Mm-hmm.
feel for their philosophy. You can get a feel for their efficiency. You can get a feel for their comfort zone, and you have a range of outcome for offenses on any given day. And this circles all the way back to one of the main things I try to because there's so many different angles and so much we're thinking about during fantasy
Mm-hmm.
draft season. But you really want to think about it as investing in offenses,
Agreed.
and the offenses that have that capacity to put up 35, 40, even 50-point games. Because, yeah, you're right about the scary thing about Philadelphia is if their defense wasn't so good, what would that look like? Detroit had a good combination of an efficient offense and a bad defense. And
Mm-hmm.
now their defense is getting better. But the funny thing is, they're like some of those Tom Brady New England teams where they don't care what the score is. They're just going to keep taking all the plays, all the low hanging fruit. They're going to
Well,
take you to school. Go ahead.
to your point about Detroit, and one of the reasons, again, going back to pace, is the ebb and flow of teams like throughout the season. Teams that when you have either changes of personnel, changes of skill players, in the case of Cleveland, changes of quarterback, but like Detroit, and getting back to Dan Campbell, one of the things like I think he's seen as like this old school, like, I'm going to bite kneecaps off of guys. He is really like, actually, like his thought processes and how he runs that team is actually very modern. Like over the last 5 to 6 weeks, Sig, they're top 10 in neutral pace. Like they are running really fast. And what Ben Johnson's doing with that offense from motion and play action, like, these are not like, oh, we can make all the yesteryear Anthony Lynn jokes, but like this is not the same team. And like looking at those things and also figuring out what teams are doing smart things like running a ton of plays on a weekly basis, it changes like throughout the year based off of what's going on with the team, the coaching staff, and all these different things.
Yeah, well, there's
a
fun
lot to
topics
unpack.
here.
I kind of
Well,
rambled
always.
through
That's me. You're just like me.
all of
Yeah,
Detroit.
well, because everything's connected to everything. I mean, how can we talk about anything without talking about everything else? I always like to tell people, I take a long time to tell stories because every story I get off on other stories to explain parts of the story, right? But first of all, Dan Campbell and that whole act is an act, and it's art of war kind of stuff. He knows. It's so they underestimate you. It's these sneaky. So yeah, of course they're a modern organization. Another thing I remember seeing earlier this year with that offense, Derek, is that they had 5 consecutive plays with 5 different run concepts, which goes against the conventional wisdom of you have to have an identity. You have to have a mode of your running game that you're so good at that's what you do. But then that gives the opponent the ability to prepare for these things. And sometimes you can really see with defenses, this is back to the Taysom Hill conversation, right? You can really see with defenses how if you, from a psychological standpoint, when you put them in a situation where they're confused or they don't understand, like it doesn't fit into everything that they prepared for, then you can sometimes just take advantage of the disorientation that creates. But by having more modes or otherwise, because all this stuff is, I mean, at some point we're going to talk about Mike Leach, right? There's just we couldn't possibly like have this show without that. But and again, I mentioned this on the waiver wire show this morning, that Chris Brown, Smart Football, like he really is like the high priest of talking about football in this way that's really intellectually stimulating, but also, and Matt Waldman, I guess they're the twin high priests, but just so on the money and elucidating like exactly what it is that's going on when we're watching football. And he just talked about how Mike Leach really revolutionized football, but it was doing a very small amount of things and mastering those things, but at the same time having things like the quarterback being able to audible to anything in the offense, Derek. Not, we have this call or this call to audible out of this, but being able to audible to anything in the offense. So there's this tension or this paradox in this, but the Lions seem to have captured both with their offense and Ben Johnson, even though they have a Jared Goff quarterback that supposedly can't make more than one read. But you get to these things, going back to what you talked about with those rich environments, play volume, because it's play volume, but it's also quality of plays, right? True. But what strikes me, going all the way back to where we talked about Tua at the beginning of the show, is perhaps, Derek, those offenses, because I don't think Miami's been like a fast-paced, high-volume offense, right?
They haven't.
So those are more fragile offenses. Those are offenses that when those bread and butter staples aren't hitting, there's not as many bites at the apple. There's not as many swings of that sword. So real quick, because you mentioned matchups, I just want to get this real quick out there for people because you're looking at this. Give me the names of at least a few, doesn't have to be exhaustive, cornerbacks that when you see that wide receivers are facing that team, that at least give you pause, that at least make you say, okay, well, just consider that this guy's going to be lining up on the other side.
Looking at, so the Seattle outside corners have been really, their pass defense has actually been good on the outside. Where they struggle is tackling and over the middle. So Tariq Woolen is somebody that I don't like to challenge. Their outside corners.
Fifth round rookie.
Yeah. I mean, it's
You
crazy.
gotta love it. No, you gotta love it.
One of the things that's so impressive, getting more in about Tariq Woolen before I rattle off some other names here, is that every year we really like honestly can kind of pick all the rookie corners out that are starting on teams and say, okay, here's the matchups we need to target, because rookie corners between Tariq and Sauce, they do not start off playing elite in the NFL. You don't see that.
Right.
Like maybe over the back half of the rookie season, they start to figure it out and you see them kind of improve their play, but it starts off horrible usually. And that's not either one of these guys. Like from the word go, Sauce has been one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. From the word go, Tariq Woolen has been that dude. He has been fantastic. So I mean, looking at those two guys, I want nothing to do with outside wide receivers versus the Jets. So, you know, the Lions this week, I think it's going to be a lot of, you know, do we feature the running backs? Do we feature tight ends? Do we feature guys out of the slot? Like Michael Carter is the best guy to probably target there. But looking at a few other teams, I mean, off the top, the Tampa Bay guys, when they're healthy, like Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean, but he's hurt right now.
J.C. Horn looked pretty good against Seattle.
J.C. Horn
they're playing Pittsburgh this week, so it's not like you're necessarily going to the well there. But
J.C. Horn is sick. That dude is awesome. He is so dang good. And there's a few guys that like you see the level of their play change depending on what they're asked to do. Like overall, AJ Terrell has been a terrible cornerback this year, but when he's been asked to shadow guys, he's been lights out. And I'm like, please let this guy shadow more. Like he has been great, but anytime they just stick him on one side and ask him to play zone, he's been burnable every week. The same thing you could say about Christian Fulton. Christian Fulton has been awesome in shadow coverage, but he has been nothing but a jag as far as like if you just stick him in zone, like you could beat him that way. So if they let him play shadow against Mike Williams, maybe he shuts him down this week. But I mean, outside of that, it's the Eagles guys. When Phil, I could not believe that the Giants let go of, and part of this is Bradbury was not a fit for what Wink wants to do. He was not a man cover corner like he was previously earlier in his career. He was one of the best man cover corners in the NFL, but you see as some of these corners get older, the ability to man cover versus just playing zone. You can make a really good narrative for like Patrick Peterson. Him moving to the zone heavy scheme of the Vikings has been amazing for him. Like he couldn't play man anymore. He got toasted. He got roasted whenever he went to try to play press man against guys. But the same thing with James Bradbury, like his man coverage skills have deteriorated over time, but he is still elite at zone coverage. So like when Philly signed him, I was like, oh my Lord, they are going to be so stinking good on defense. As soon as they signed him, like one of our editors, Mike Mayer, is a huge Eagles fan. I slacked him immediately, and I was like, all right, your defense is going to be top 3 against the pass. Like, lock it in. Darius Slay and James Bradbury. Nobody is going
to. And then CD Deuce on top of that.
Yep. I mean, Chauncey Gardner's been playing out of his mind. Avonte Maddox in this scheme, when he's been healthy, has been really, really good too. So, I mean, just off the top of my head, outside of them, Marlon Humphrey is a guy I never want to challenge.
Yes.
He is
Amari Cooper this weekend.
Yes. Amari Cooper, that's another reason why, like, when I get to the primer on that game, which I'm actually on that game right now, I'm probably going to be higher on DPJ than consensus this week. Because Marcus Peters on the other side he's the same thing as, like, he's the lesser version of Trevion Diggs. He's super aggressive, likes to jump routes, but that also means that Marcus Peters, when he's not on his game like that and he reads it wrong, he gets burnt religiously down the field. Go routes, double moves, posts, like he can get toasted. But yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, Sig, those are the main guys.
That's good. And Pretty Eye brought up Patrick Surtain too.
Yep.
And that's a good one.
Xavier Howard's playing better.
Yeah, he's back. Too. He was banged up. For a while. See, that's the other thing you got to track, right? And it makes me want to bring up play IDP fantasy football. All my leagues that I
Agreed.
care the most about are IDP leagues for
Agreed.
any number of reasons. But on the IDP side, Derek, it's the rookie corner rule. You want rookie corners on your IDP team because they get tested so much. And Tariq Woolen is actually not getting tested anymore. They're like, that's enough.
Teams are like, nope, we'd rather just
That's
poke on Michael Jackson now.
Yeah. So that is something. And if Derek Stingley was healthy, we'd be talking about Derek Stingley too, I think.
I still feel like, and this, not to go too far back here, like I for the life of me, and I was talking with Thor Nystrom yesterday in our Slack about this. Why the Texans drafted Stingley over Sauce Gardner still makes my head want to explode, Sig. Like I don't get that. I still don't
Jack
get
Easterby was still with the organization. I don't know. Who knows? But it's, hopefully it's a win-win for both organizations. All right, whatever.
I hope so.
We really want to not stay on any rails, but we can go off the rails. And look, folks, Derek D Bro _FFB, Fantasy Pros, the primer, and all that good stuff. And we're going to give you all the takes you need. And really, it's just giving you someone to either agree with you and make you feel good about your decision, or someone to blame if you change your decision because of it and it's not on you. So we're here for you. But I guess where I want to start, Derek, is where does football, where does the path that put you right here today talking to me, like the love of football or love of talking about football or thinking about football, or sports in general, or where does that begin? Where does that spark? I mean, what's the earliest football memory? Because I bring this up because 4 or 5 times a year at least I'll bring up. I did last week because they played the Kellen Winslow Chargers Miami game, like the captivation of that all out war. I just can remember that as when football really got my attention. And of course, growing up in the Pittsburgh area, that's part of the story too. Where does the journey begin for you?
I mean, growing up in South Louisiana, for me, it started and ended with, back then it was, the Saints were not good. So it was the Aints.
The Aints
and
invented the paper bag. That was invented down here. Like put a paper bag on your head.
I remember the Wade Wilson years. I remember the Jim Everett years. I remember, and everything in between. The Aaron Brooks saga, where we were like, they actually win a playoff game, and they could be good. And then
he's like the Benjamin Button of quarterbacks. He just gets worse and worse and worse.
When Drew Brees got there, it felt like just a revitalization of a city, of a culture, of a team that were like that type of, even like the early 90s, the Mora era, when they were just a ridiculous defense. There was never that type of hope. I remember the year that, like, when they went to the Super Bowl, even like you felt like there was no game the Saints couldn't come back and win. The Saints were in every single game. But going back to like way back when, I mean, it was the Saints, and I remember going, and I've only been to like a handful of like live, actual, like real NFL games, like sitting in the stands watching it. It's just not something I'm able to do now, or when I was previously like, younger and stuff. But I remember going to a Saints game, and that's really when I got hooked, man. I remember going to a Saints game, and this was the final, it was the second to last year. It might have been the final year that Joe Montana played, and this is when he was with the Chiefs. And I remember driving down to New Orleans, and I wasn't even like there to like necessarily root for the Saints. Like, I wanted to drive down there and watch Montana played. And I remember he lit New Orleans up. It was like threw over 300 yards. I'd have to go back and look at it, but like multiple touchdowns, and just looked like the Joe Montana of old. And I remember watching that game being like, good Lord, I could watch this replayed 10 times over. And I think it was probably like 10 or 11, 12 at the time. And I don't know. I love football. And the funny part about it, I was always huge into Saints football, because growing up in Louisiana, like really one of the two passions, especially back then, was not so much the Saints, but it was all things LSU. And I couldn't care less about LSU. Like, I didn't live in Baton Rouge. It was just not something I gave a crap about, but it was all things New Orleans Saints, man. Like, even to this day, like, I'm better about my fandom bias. But it was, for a long time, there was like, okay, the Saints lost. Okay, well, I'm probably going to be in a not great mood Sunday afternoons, Mondays and stuff. I mean, growing up in Pittsburgh area, Steelers lose, It was not a
Oh,
happy Monday,
oh,
man.
one of my cousins chased the other one around with a butcher knife over a Steelers argument.
Oh, jeez.
It's well. See, let me draw a contrast between the Pittsburgh Steelers fan base and the New Orleans fan base, because the Steelers fan base will turn on the team
Mm-hmm.
immediately. The Steelers fan
No, New
base,
Orleans.
they love the team like it's their kids,
Yep. Yep.
and it's something to behold. It's really quite a fun thing to behold. I'll tell you a story off air after the show about that. Anyway, uh, I want to respect people's privacy, really. But it's the football culture in New Orleans. New Orleans is one of the best football culture of anywhere in the world. I mean,
Agree.
here's one of the things that I always cite, Derek, during Mardi Gras parades, while everyone's waiting for the parade to start. What is everybody doing in the street, Derek?
Singing Who Dat?
Right, they're throwing a football. Kids are throwing a football.
We're all throwing footballs. Yep.
The parades throw out those Nerf footballs, those foam footballs, and they're all throwing footballs. They're all throwing. You see like one kid loading up and like 7 kids all trying to outleap each other.
Yep.
The girls are out there elbowing and banging with the boys. It's a terrific football culture, and certainly Joe Montana. That Kansas City Chiefs Joe Montana beat my Steelers in a playoff game, by the way. In the last seconds, looking like Joe Montana. Well, he's actually from the town next to the town I grew up in. I grew up in Bentleyville. He grew up in Monongahela, Pennsylvania. Cradle quarterbacks, cradle head coaches, cradle of great football things. However, since I've moved down here to Louisiana, Derek, this is where we're going to cheese everybody out. But tell the people why Louisiana is the best state in the country.
Oh man, I think it comes down to just not even just the food, because the food is the 101. I don't care about your northeastern seafood. I don't care about the best place for tacos. New Orleans has the best food, hands down, regardless, whatever. And whether that just fuels a happy people, Sig, like what, and I guess like I feel like it's the best football city is that not only the disparity of the food and the culture and all those different things, but I throw this out there because when the Saints played the Seattle Seahawks a few years ago and it was in Seattle, I had some family members that bought tickets, flew up to Seattle, and they had a horrible time up there. like Seattle fans, like legit were like,
who that's up in Seattle,
dude. It was horrible. Like they were throwing stuff at my in-laws that were in the stands. It was like they were cursing at them, all kinds of stuff in Seattle. And this is not just Seattle. I'm not just trying to rag on that fan base, but like you see this, like certain fan bases are just rabid about their team, and it manifests itself in interesting and not always productive ways. You can go to any Saints game, and while the Saints might get trashed, the person right next to you might still be like, "Hey, do you want a beer? Hey, like what's going on?" Like they're not going to try to like cuss you out and fight you in a game because of the Saints are losing. Like that's why, like, I think going to a New Orleans Saints football game, tailgating, all those different, it's a totally different experience than if you go to so many other NFL cities and take in a live game. That fan experience is unlike anything else.
Oh my God. It's why. So a ritual, if your life revolves around your NFL team, is you wait for the schedule to be announced and you plan like your trip, like you said, the Seattle, or in any time New Orleans is on the schedule, most people smartly pick New Orleans. I mean, for cities to go to, San Francisco has changed. That's the thing about New Orleans. It doesn't change, for better or for worse.
Nope.
It doesn't change.
Doesn't change.
I love all the things I've learned since I moved down here, Derek.
Hurricanes, everything cannot wash the culture of that city away.
No,
Nothing.
and it used to flood every year when they started the city like 300 plus years ago. It would flood every year, and they would just rebuild every year. But you're right that the fans. Well, one of the things about New Orleans, I think, is that typifies the city is that we all get out in the street together and know each other, and there's a humanity, an acknowledgement of the humanity in other people that is just because life is lived more out in the streets and in public in a way that it isn't as much anymore. People go off to their subdivisions or in front of their screens or whatever. In New Orleans, it's still about getting out and being with people. Like you said, Saints games, atmospheres. A Saints game reverberates through the city for the whole day. Like from the moment the day starts until you even hear. I live like just a couple blocks from Claiborne here, right off Esplanade, And you hear like the people running up and down Claiborne on like their motorcycles and the four-wheelers and stuff revving their engines, and it's just like the whole city just crackles with excitement and anticipation on a Saints Day. But you mentioned the food, so why Louisiana is so great in the food, and I want to rhapsodize about that just for a second. There's great food, and all over the country and even the world, I've visited places and had perfect food. I've had food I'm eating like this is perfect. Like this can't, like steak Florentine in Florence, Manchurian cauliflower in like southern India, pizza in Naples at the Trianon. But New Orleans food it's sorry, Trojan, it's sexual. It's sexual. Like eating New Orleans food, like it makes you make noises you make when you're having
it. I just thought of eating the first cold day in Louisiana, like whether it's the beginning of January or February, and you get that first great pot of gumbo. Oh my God, man! It just there's nothing like it.
We're doing the thing of after, so we get a smoked turkey on Thanksgiving, and then we make turkey gumbo like 2 or 3 days after.
So
my
good.
God. And we have a thing where like I just it hurts my heart if I see a drop of it get wasted. Just a drop of it. Like if, like even eat, like I want to lick the bowl instead of washing it, But there's so much of that in the food with the way the food is prepared. And it's way over spiced and over salted, which is wonderful. Live while you're alive, because it really comes back to a larger philosophy of explore your senses and live while you're alive. Like it's an amusement park life. We're here, ride the rides. Your senses are like the rides, and it's it's about today. That's what Mardi Gras means. Like hard times might be coming tomorrow, so today we're going to celebrate being alive today. And it's kind of a mode, and it makes for poor infrastructure and lots of other things. But at the same time, your soul is right because you're living to appreciate being alive. And one of the ways you do that is by stimulating your senses with all these different things, most specifically food, and it gets you back in touch with nature. I had no idea, Derek. I had no idea one of the best things about moving to New Orleans would be the farmers markets.
Oh, I love the farmers market, man.
The produce, the stuff that they grow in the soil that used to flood out of the Mississippi, we messed that up. Is just, I thought I had a strawberry. I thought I had a bell pepper. I thought I had these things before, a sweet potato, whatever. And then I had the stuff grown down here. I was like, oh, that's what a strawberry, a Ponchatoula strawberry, that's what a strawberry actually tastes like. And I just don't know how to explain this to people. There's no way to truly explain it with words. It's something you can experience. And and I hope, because I didn't know, Derek. I didn't know. Where did you grow up?
Sig, and I think it's so many things, and almost like it's so ingrained, the food is, into the culture, because you have not only these dishes and these culinary delights that are so indignant to that area, but it's also like recipes that are passed down from grandparents to parents to
it's all honoring the ancestors.
It's everything.
It's all like, hey, the people before us did it right.
The same cast iron skillet my grandma made this in. Like now, like there's just certain things that like you have to be there, and you have to experience to really understand it. And I don't want to sound like snobbish by saying that, but like it's true.
It's cultural. It's cultural. Well, look, I think one of the things is wax rhapsodic about New Orleans. I think that down here, people understand that you didn't do anything by yourself, that all the people that came before you, you're standing on their shoulders. Like that's why you use the recipes. That's why you use the stuff they handed down to you, because they did it right. And then also you have a responsibility to teach the people that are coming after you. And it's a joy. It's a joy to participate in both of these things, but it's not about you. It's not just about you. You're just a link in a chain. And the other thing I'll say about food and the farmers markets is that it makes you be in touch with the seasons. Wow, what a concept. Like, it's crawfish season, it's satsuma season, it's strawberry season, right? It's even in the summer, it's eggplant, it's okra, it's watermelon season. Oh my gosh, the watermelons you can get off the back of people's trucks.
I love
down
strawberry
here.
season, both for the beers, and then I love crawfish. Like, I'm sorry if you've had crawfish made anywhere else across the nation.
It's
you have no clue what real crawfish is. Like,
come to crawfish boil
just
here.
Don't. If anybody tells you they boil the crawfish and then put the seasoning on it afterwards, you run away screaming. You do not put that in your mouth.
Just come on down, folks. Come on down.
Please.
Come on down. Come on down to Louisiana. See Derek, see me, see all the great things waiting for you folks. Well, it's always a joy to get to do this show with wonderful people like Derek, and not just sharing our love of football and our fantasy football torture, but sharing being so classy.